Hey guys, this is TC May. Wanted to bring you an unofficial guide video for working with ACF or Ascent Combat Framework. This video talks about Section 2, primarily Section 2.1, which deals with statistics, attributes, and parameters. These are things that drive your character's behavior, things like strength, endurance, and constitution, which are your attributes. Parameters, things like attack damage, defense, critical chances, things like that. And then also you have your statistics, such as health, stamina, mana, and things of that nature. These are basically defined in a set of tag values. If you go out to the project settings in your ACF example project and you go under gameplay tag section, you'll see the gameplay tag table list. And then here in the example project, the RPG tags have already been defined for you. If you double left click on this, you can see that some of the values are already here. These are generally set up with a prefix value, like for example, rpg.statistic or rpg.attribute or rpg.parameter, and then whatever those things are, like health and stamina and strength, constitution, etc. So if you wanted to build your own values or modify these, the way that you do that is you basically could go out to where these are located at. These are actually in the Ascent Combat Framework content directory under the configuration folder. If you don't see this by default, you can go into your view options, make sure you're showing plugin content, and if your plugin is installed at the engine level and not in the project level, you can go out and say show engine content as well. You should be able to find this folder there. Under configuration, you could basically build your own. If you right click in here and go under miscellaneous, and you tell it that you want to get a data table, it's going to ask you for the structure type. And under your structure type in here, you can go down and say that you're looking for, I believe there's one in here for gameplay tag table row. And that'll have the default set up for you to be able to define those. Basically, they're exactly like the ones I showed you over here earlier with the RPG tag table. So once those are set up, you have them in your list, then you can also go into the project settings under Advanced RPG or ARS section, and you'll see in here this secondary attribute generation rules, and you can set up your attributes, roots, parameters, and statistics levels for each of the tag values. And again, this is done in the example project. Now, if you're building a brand new project and you want to use these settings, there is a way that you could go and open up the example and then export this file. And when you go and open up your new project, you can bring this in and it'll build everything for you. So the way that these basically work is you set up whatever the attribute is, and then you talk about the influence statistics or parameters that are in here. And these curves all drive behavior of your character's primary attributes, which in turn trickle down into setting things like your statistics or your other parameters and things like that. So in this case, you're showing that your RPG.strength, your attribute.strength, is actually influencing your damage with a curve here. So whatever your strength level is gets looked up on this curve, and then that curve translates that into a damage value. So if you had a strength of, say, whatever this is here, if you had a strength of 20, you would do about 100 points of damage for a strength of 20. Okay, and if you go in through each of these curves and look that up, at the intersections of those, basically how it works. Now, in your character component, at the character level, if you go into, for example, the sample player BP, and you go in and look at the statistics component here, this is where you can tell the system how to use those. So by default, this is set up with generate from default attributes. And so this will look at whatever value you've placed here in those curves. It'll look it up there. So if I said my strength is 15, it'll go and look up the strength, whatever curve we've specified, look up the value of 15 on that, and then spit back out a number like for damage or whatever. So here's your strength, constitution, and endurance. If you want this to actually use a character level, I'll show you here. We can see that he has a hit point value of 779, for example. And if we go back into the character level here, it's showing he's level 4. I'll make him level 10, and what we should see is that that doesn't make any difference to his statistics out here. He still has 779 as his hit points. And the reason is because we're not using a leveling system at this point to drive any of his behavior. So if we want to drive all those things by his level, then we have to flip this switch here that says, where it says do not use leveling system, we would flip this on and tell it to generate stats from curves. And if you're going to generate stats from curves, the other thing you want to do is take this stat load method and switch that over to load by actual level from curves. And you'll see it grays these other things out as you make that choice there. So what you can do now is you can actually have this all driven by lookups where it says your character is level 10 and what curve do I use to generate these statistics. Now just for a second I want to go back and talk about, if we leave this the way that it was where it says generate from default attributes or whatever, I can specify at this level what those values are. So I showed there my constitution drives my hit points if we looked at that in that other curve there. And right now it has 779 on it, as we showed. If I were to go in here and flip this on the statistics component and say he has a constitution of, let's say, 50, now you would actually see that that changes the level of his available hit points because I'm specifying a larger constitution value there, which in turn gets looked up at the project settings level, goes out here to the advanced RPG. It says your constitution influences your hit points. It goes to the constitution table, finds the value of 50, and returns back this value, which is 1,524. And that's what you see in this character when we go out here to the game. I hit Shift F1 and we go out and look at his gameplay. Stuff in the way here, but he goes out to 1524 because I've specified that level in the settings of the ARS component there. So one of the things you could do if you wanted to is you could have a system where as you gain, experience points or levels or whatever, you could go in here and drive these values manually. But if you were using it to where it was automated by this, you just say load actual level by curves and generate stats from curves. Now what you do is you set up all the different parameters that are going to be used by this. Now it's important to understand that if you have this turned on, you still have to have the values specified out here in the project settings for these advanced RPG curve values out here under ARS. But what I did with mine to just kind of make it a little bit easier to understand is I went in here and I said to generate the stats from the curves, and under primary stat by level curves, you probably have to roll this out. You can go in here and put each of the same ones in here. So strength, constitution, and endurance, for example. You go down here under RPG and you look under attributes. And under your attributes, you're going to find strength, for example. And so under the strength, I'm going to leave this blank for a second. I'm going to go and I'm going to put another one in here, and this is going to be my constitution. The same thing, I would go down here under RPG and find constitution. And then we'll put another one in here, and we want to pull it up for endurance. Go down and find endurance. And now that we have that in there, we could also say experience points for next level curve. You don't have to turn this on either, but there is a curve in here for your leveling curve. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. So now if I compile this and look at the statistics component, let's just set our character level to 1 real quick and see what that does. So let's hit save. And I want to minimize that. Go out here, and I'll just hit Alt-P to play this. Now you can see I have 0 in here right now because I don't have any curve specified in this level right here to tell it what to do with my level 1 for the strength or constitution or anything else. So what I did for mine is I went out and I actually built a real quick curve. So let's go back to configuration, and I'll show you how I built mine just quickly. So if I go in here, I just copied over, one of the existing ones. So I'll just say, let's copy, duplicate strength to damage. And I'm going to call this level to constitution, for example. And if I go in here and just zoom out, highlight all these points and delete them, I now have a flat curve. And I can just go in here and say at whatever level, you just keep rolling the mouse in to get these zoomed into where you can actually see numbers on them. And right mouse click will let you drag this around to get where you can see it on screen. Now the easy way to do this is to actually specify a point and then set a value. So if I wanted to say, for example, that at level 1, I could go in here and say add a key. And at level 1, I want to say my constitution is going to be, let's say, 5. And I could also set at level 0. You could put in here too, add a key. And just say at level 0, your constitution will be 0. Level 1, it's going to be 5. I can right click, say add another key. Specify that that key is going to be number 2. And let's say at level 2, my constitution will go to 10. Add another key. And at level 3, my constitution will jump to, let's say, 20. And I'll put another one in here and just say add a key there and say that's going to be level 4. And let's say it jumps to 25. Let's just say that for now. So if I go back, now that I've set this level to constitution value up, I can go back in here and under my constitution table, I can say let's use my level to constitution curve. And now when I go out and I hit play, and I'll go out here and just hit Alt-P in that window. Now you can see I have a value of 43 in my hit points. And the reason I have 43 in my hit points again is because if we take a look at that level to constitution table, at level 1, my constitution is 5. And if I go and look at my constitution to hit point table, it says that if my constitution is 5, which is here, at the intersection of 5, I have roughly 43, 40 some points, 43, 44 points there. So that's where you're getting that 43 is because I've specified that at level 1, my constitution is 5, and it can look that up for me now. And that same behavior, you can modify that with each of these to drive your character pretty accurately. So one of the things you may want to do is specify this also for your leveling curve. You might say, find a system that you like for setting these up. I did mine where like level 1, you're 0 points, and level 2, you're at 1,000 points, and then you go like 2,000, 2,500, 3,000, 3,500, so on and so forth. That way, as you gain experience points through things in combat, if you're using a leveling system, this will automatically drive your character level. Your character level, in turn, have lookup values to drive all your different behaviors for these statistics. And you can model, a lot of your different RPG game types with setting this up this way. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a little bit more understanding of what's going on with those things. I struggled with this a little bit myself because I accidentally made the mistake of I didn't have a level to constitution curve when I first started playing with this. I actually just thought, oh, I have to use the constitution to hit point curve in here, and I was actually looking up the same value on both sides. Now, there are also ways to modify these attributes using some of your items. So when you are building weapons and items and armor and things like that in the game, if you look under the item blueprints for any of these things, you actually have a spot in here under the ARS value. Actually, I always go to open full blueprint editor. It usually just makes it a little bit easier to find things for me, and I go to class defaults. And if you go down here through the class defaults in the item, I think there's a section in here where you can specify the equipable items section of this. And you have attribute modifiers, and in here you can tell it what statistics these affect and what parameters, or attributes they affect, and then how it affects them. So one of the examples that they show in the documentation is if you had, an additive for a statistic, that was driving like a stamina value, for example, you go in here and say, this is going to drive my stamina. I go down here and find RPG, statistic, stamina. And then in here, I could set the max value. For example, they use 20. And what that means is that this would influence that by an additional 20% boost or whatever. So it says it'll raise that max stamina by 20, right? And then you can also have, depending on what it is you're doing, you could have regeneration values on these things and what the regen values are. So there are ways to modify those attributes and set that up in there as well. And then, as I was saying, with your experience and leveling system, you modify your curve to say at each level you gain, or at least level of experience that you gain, you want to increase additional levels against your character. And in your blueprints for the characters and for the monsters or enemies or whatever, if you go into the blueprint under, say, blueprint characters, and you go, for example, like one of your enemies in here, if you look at their statistics component, they have a value in here where you can specify, if they're using a leveling system, the experience points to give on death by current level. So you can use this to say, every time you kill one of these creatures, you get X number of points. That continues to bump your levels up and everything. There's also a perk-based system where you can specify that you have a, where's that at in here? It's under perk-based system, assign perks manually. So you can also set in here what types of perks you gain on each level. And then there's a function that you can call that assigns perk to attribute. And using a lot of this stuff in here, you can drive this behavior using your blueprints. And if you really want to get into how this thing works, you can go in here, and if you look at the documentation, there's these things that they call docu items. And the one that you're probably going to be interested in for this is if you go down to the ARS system here, there's a thing called a docu actor in here. And this docu actor shows you all of the different functions and calls and ways to set these values. And it shows you the getters and the setters, so you can get current attribute values and values for statistics and all these different things. And you can also set these, and then you can create levels on your character. There's a thing in here somewhere I thought I saw where after you level up, you basically call, what was in here somewhere? There's a thing where you can call your, you set the level and then regenerate the character. That's not there. Well, I did it as an example. I did it directly in the character here just to show you. If you pulled out the statistics component and you go into the statistics component, you could say get level, get current level. And you could also set the current level. Pull off this again. Say set current level. Level here. I thought I had set level in here. Yeah, set character level. I'm staring at it. So you can set your character level, and which one of the things you could just do real simple is you can go in here and say you want to do integer plus integer. So I could just say I want to get my current level and then like add 1 to it and set that as my new character level. And then I could go in here and just say add a function. So let's say keyboard L, for example. And every time I press the L key, I want to go and get my current level and add 1 to it. And then once I change my level, what I would want to do is come off the statistics component and say set level. I think it says set character level. No, hold on. Yeah, set new level and reinitialize. I can drive that there, and my new level, of course, is going to be whatever that value is of my ranges. So I'm just kind of slapping something together here to show you what I'm talking about, but that would give you a real quick idea if you're using those level up systems. If I were to compile that and hit, let me see what my current level is here. I'm going to start at, like, say, level 1, leveling system, and I want to go back and change this to, yeah, generate stats from curves, and make sure I got the right things on here. Load actual by level from curves, generate by curves, and make sure I got my attributes turned on. Okay, so if I hit play, minimize this out and hit play, at F11, you can see I got 43 points. If I hit the L key, I just gave myself a level and I went to 124. Hit the L key again, I gave myself a level, I went to 589, so on and so forth. Now 779, remember I only set that to a handful of levels to give myself the X number of constitution points. And you can see in here also, like the level, I don't have any stamina currently, so I wouldn't be able to swing a weapon, but you need to do the same thing with this. If you're going to use the stats component this way, by level, you would want to go and create like a level 2 strength curve, and then the strength's going to go to damage in the setting that you have up front. And same thing with your constitution, you would have or endurance rather, you'd have a level 2 endurance, and then endurance affects stamina. So build yourself these level to whatever attribute tables or curves, and that will help you get a little bit of an understanding of what's going on in here. They also have a tutorial that's shown in the combat framework documentation under section 2.9 that talks about setting up a stat bar. That documentation, you can read that and go and look at that. But also, if you wanted to see a real quick example of how to set the stat bars up, you can go directly into the blueprint section here under UI. And under UI, they have a thing in here called an on-head user widget, which is basically these stats. Your widgets and all the graphs for those are right in here anyway. So you can just run through this documentation. You can either run through the documentation or look at the example that's already in the thing here. So I'm not going to go back through that portion of it. I wanted to give you a little bit better understanding of the attribute system and how to set up curves and things like that to drive your character based on levels. So hopefully I've given you a little bit more understanding about those things and a little example where you can go and play around with that. Again, my name's TC Mabe. These are the unofficial documentation videos, and I'll be trying to get some more of these out going into section 3 next. Thanks for watching, and good luck.